so sad.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Provincetown Art Gallery Association Forum 24 Poetry Panel, The Lost of Bohemia. See, and I bragged earlier that I've been doing this all summer and I don't need the script, and now I went blank. I did. Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you all for coming. We have some Forum 24 swag on the table by donation if you'd like to grab anything. And before we get started, just a few thank yous. First of all, I want to thank my co-chair of the Forum 24 panel, Grace Hopkins. Grace. I really could not have done this without Grace. I couldn't have had a better partner with her, and it makes all the difference. What?
Sorry.
Okay.
No, I just was sorry.
So I want to thank the Gifford House for hosting us. I mean, this is phenomenal. And it was mentioned to us today that they really are supportive of community events and want to support events like this. And that just, makes my heart just... So, I'm going to let Kathe introduce the panel, and in introducing her, I just want to thank her for also being a wonderful person to work with. We started talking on the phone last winter.
January.
Yeah, January. And I think Dakota, some of you may know Dakota, who has been an artist here in this town and out on the other coast. She had suggested that we have a conversation, and this is what it led to. As we've had these events over the summer, I've connected with new people, and I've reconnected with people that I've known for many years. And, it's one of the special things about this town that I love. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kathe, and thanks again for coming.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out on such a beautiful late summer afternoon, because I know it's really intoxicating, and it's why we're all here. I just wanted to say that this, it's actually not to correct Sid again, but it's called the Lost Edge of Bohemia, so it's not the loss of Bohemia. Hopefully that's not what we're talking about, but it might be. I don't know. I'm really open to the input from all the poets and writers here today. So I just want to say last summer, actually, Pat and I were talking about making a zine called The Lost Edge of Bohemia. I think I was talking about it, but I kind of sucked him into it. And that this idea that we would have a zine and we would, just try to, in some kind of subtle punk rock way, refocus or bring some attention to the Bohemian lifestyle if that was still happening in Provincetown. And we could, since Pat's much younger than me. I'm almost 66, and I don't know, how old are you? 35. So, we had different, we're close, but, different kind of points of reference. So I thought that would be really interesting. We never did it. And so then when I was asked to curate a panel of poets, I thought, well, it's a good time to bring out that idea again. A couple of years ago, so I've lived in town on and off for, how old are you? 34. So I moved here year-round when I was pregnant with Nola, but I had spent many summers before. These are my daughters. I'm sure they hate that. They both grew up in town. And they went to elementary school here and drove for Mercedes cab and went to the sailing club and all the things. So I've lived here on and off since then. I did take a big break, not thinking that my children would want to move back here. When my kids went to college, I moved to Hudson and then back to New York City. And then came back about, I think, 8 years ago now, because my grandchildren started being born and my kids started coming back. Like, they wanted to live here and they wanted to raise their kids here. So I was like, all right. And little by little, I'm lured back into Provincetown, even though I refer to Provincetown as an ex, like a shameless hussy that's always trying to drag me back in, that I'm like, no more, never again. That's my relationship with Provincetown. But as far as this panel goes, a couple of years ago, after like at the tail end of COVID, because I work pretty much exclusively on my computer, I thought, it's summer. Kathe, get a job in town, something that gets you out of the house. And I started working for Arts Dune Tours, which came to me in a vision. Never went on a Dune tour, no Rob Costa, but I always thought it was some wacky tourist thing. And from the first tour that Rob took me on out in the dunes, I fell in love with the Dune tours. And I've spent time in a lot of the Dune shacks. And it's just so interesting how, like, my disassociation from what I thought, and maybe true for me anyway, is happening in Provincetown now, was just like this huge melancholy came over me in learning about the Bohemian history of the Dune Shacks. And so that is not what this panel is about, but that's where it comes from in me. And 1949 was a big year for the Dune colony. It was like kind of the height. And I'll just say, I'm going to just read a couple of quotes, but just to say that we are celebrating Forum 49, and that was a time when artists, I know there was a panel, what is an artist? I was not at that panel, but when the artists were treated as shamans and seers, and they were like taken care of by the community, because the Bohemian community, this was a Bohemian community. So the Portuguese were kind of Bohemian, and the gay culture was Bohemian, and, the artists, and everybody was kind of at that level, at least in the average, right? So it's a little bit different now. So anyway, I just wanted to say all of that, and we'll see. That's my own, as I was saying to the poets, that's my own opinion, not necessarily represented by, or need to be represented by, the poets behind me. This is a quote that I learned on the Dune tours. I couldn't find it anywhere, but I think it's worth saying. It's by Mary Heaton Vorse, who, published The Time in the Town, and I heard that it was from there, but I couldn't find out. She was a leftist writer, she was an artist, she was a patron, feminist historian, and the quote that I have learned in the Dune tours, who would live in Provincetown? The outlaw, the artist, or those that hate civilization? And this is another quote that is an exact quote. If we grow old wisely, we lay aside the senseless forms and meaningless conventions of society and go back to a more primitive mode of social intercourse, picking our friends the way children do, because we like them, spending time enough with them to get some real good out of them. And that was also from Time in the Town, which was published in 1942. So I'm just going to read, this is just a little piece from something I published in 1995 or 96, and it was part of a show in Boston called The Boston School. So it was about sort of my punk rock past, and it was Nan Golden and Jack Pearson, Stephen Tashin, David Armstrong, and that whole crew. There were more people in the show, I'm forgetting. And actually, that's how I met Eileen. I met you at the opening. Yeah, so that's a million years ago. Anyway, so this is a piece that I wrote, and it was 1995, long time ago. I was definitely in my wild heyday in Provincetown. I was definitely not sober by any means. Anyway, so it says, what is it about our circle of friends mirroring so many other circles of incomplete, loving, striving addicts that keeps us from healing? I do believe in our wisdom as the misguided, our vision a Polaroid brought back from the inner womb of cultural reality. Why can't we say no to that lost beloved ache and move on to more grown-up stuff? We just don't want to. Sometimes it feels better to hold on to the beauty of what has been lost than to adjust to the heart-burning inquietude of what is now present. There is some kind of irrational nobility at work here. In our seemingly unconscious, chaotic way, we are trying to return to a sense of feverish, irresponsible youthfulness that has become sadly romantic and archaic. The Chinese believe that before you can conquer a beast, you must make it beautiful. The beast of our unformed and unrequited yearning may loom large, but one thing we never tire of is is its beauty. Stubbornly and melodramatically, we recreate ourselves in ecstatic states of social decay. We can't shut up and we will not disappear. We continue to create art about our lives and our friends. We continue to document and carry those who are gone. We will continue to decorate ourselves and our world. At night and sometimes in the mornings, we will continue to lay our heads in the laps of friends. And thank you. So our first poet is Pat Kearns. And Pat is very humble. I think his bio, I don't have it in front of me, it was like he's a poet, he writes for The Independent, he curates the People's Parlor, which is now turned into 20 Summers monthly poetry reading. And he's an amazing friend, and he has really brought me, one of the reasons he's here is because he has brought me to have faith in the Bohemia Provincetown today. So ya.
Thanks. Oh,
You can turn it up.
big Bohemia.
Yeah, you can do like this.
Okay. I feel like my ass is in Eileen's lap. Oh, thanks, baby. Sorry.
I got it.
Yeah, we can. Yeah. Okay. Hey. Okay, so I guess I'm Bohemian. I guess I like that. I brought some poems with me to read to you, and the first one I'm just going to read. Well, since I'm starting this off, I'll just read the beginning of some writing I did last night. I write for the newspaper now, which is like I'm edited, and there's it's about something. But usually, what I do on my own is like, kind of like plein air writing on Commercial Street. Like sometimes after midnight, I'll walk over to the soda machine outside the hardware store and kind of write about it. Like, it's a little weird, but then other things happen on the street and I'll write about that. So that'll be in here too. And I guess that's kind of like Bohemian. I think okay, let's start. Bohemian was a French term, an incorrect label placed on the Roma people who some said came from Bohemia years before the present-day Czech Republic. The Roma people were nomadic and worked on the fringes of society. The word developed its modern significance in Paris during the 1800s from its impression of nomadism, creativity, and poverty. So when you talk about like town, here, there's only like 3,700 people who live here year-round. I'm one of them, so that's not maybe that Bohemian, because part of Bohemia is having a transient population of people being able to come through. And so there are certain people who are true Bohemians, and one of them is my old roommate, Patrick Lutheran, who made the bookshop float last year. And we just ran into him by the dumpster after the parade, And he's always kind of floating through town. But you can tell that the town has changed because when he comes now, he stays farther and farther away from town, Whereas, like, when you talk about the Lost Edge, it's like I keep thinking about Patrick Lutheran, like, kind of moving, like, every time he comes to stay. It's like off the edge of Bohemia. The first thought I had was how everyone is now working from home. I think 50 years ago that would have been insane to think about. People, especially the professional class, not showing up to work, like in person, whatever that means now. This is still a strange little town on the water. You take the ferry over and check out this village at Land's End. It's funny. Maybe the mixing will always make it Bohemian, but it's no longer a worker town. It hit when Jumper Lahiri said there used to be no cappuccinos and lattes, but just a few places you could grab a cup of coffee. That coffee really speaks. I've had an idea for the last 2 years I'd start selling coffee out my window to make money. Just coffee. One photographer in town used to turn his apartment into a restaurant and charge people. He got evicted for it and left town. Is that where we lost our edge? Are there too many rules now? The police keep a lot off the record so crime doesn't affect tourism. When I first moved here, I worked at a different hotel in town. A local bartender went up to one of the guest rooms with a meth head from Michigan. They were both still high from the night before, and the Michigan guy started punching the bartender, who was tied up in the face. Then the guy freaked out even more and ripped the air conditioner from the wall and threw it out the third-floor window. A housekeeper heard the commotion. By the time the police arrived and barged through the door, there was blood everywhere, and the bartender had to be flown to Hyannis. There were no charges, and the Michigan guy flew back with friends on his private jet. The police didn't want to hurt tourism. They told the hotel owners, who ended up selling all their property to a Boston corporation for $24 million. This is all fiction. The Boston Corporation now owns at least 5 hotels in town, including the largest 104-room hotel near the breakwater. Town's now a money pit. It's wiped out. The reason I say it's kind of like a fiction is because I fictionalize like my involvement here. Like I'm writing as if, and sometimes thinking as if I lived here like 40 years ago, but I didn't. Like I moved to town 5 years ago because I got a job at one of these hotels. So I can't say, oh, well, times have really changed, you know? But I love those people like me. Oh, wow, it's really changed around here, and I just moved here. All right, I don't want to go too. I'm gonna read you this poem called Living Here. It's bizarre living here in the back of the inn with 2 windows on the little lot and the shirtless queen singing through his beard, San Francisco Dave's friend in room 14. I can hear his entire process of climbing the staircase behind my pillow, opening the creaky door to the green hallway, stomping sand into his room from whatever beach rendezvous the night called for. Living here is a whole new language you learn. In time, the ebbs and flows of the fleeting vacationers, the windless day you sweat through, stubborn calves, and free time gets eaten up by book talks, panel discussions, and local poetry readings. Where are you from? The real estate agent from Boston asked me before checking into the hotel. I sink low and put on my Slavic scowl. Bulgaria. And he nods. He feels settled, even more taken care of. He throws me a $5 bill and assumes I'm here for the season. Soon the harbor will turn to ice and my veins will expand in a hot bath. I'll sip hot coffee and spit outside at all the empty homes and write letters to people brave enough to take a chance out there in the lonely world. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Got this.
I need help. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to introduce you.
Is that enough?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's plenty. Great. Thank you, Mackenzie. Okay, I'm going to read Oona's introduction because it's a little bit longer, but I do want to say our next reader is Oona Patrick, who grew up in town. She's from the Patrick family. If those of you have lived in town for a long time, they've been here for a long time. And it's just interesting because Oona's always a little below the radar. We met actually like towards the end of my regular like full-time living here at a, was it Richard McCann? Yeah, at a writing workshop at the Fine Arts Work Center with Richard McCann. And so I was like, who are you? And she's like, I live in town. And I'm like, oh, so do I. You know, it's one of those things. But we've stayed in touch. And I really wanted, because of her longevity in town and just like also Portuguese, you know, I really wanted her kind of take on this subject. So Oona Patrick is a writer who grew up in Provincetown and now lives in New York. She is the co-editor of Behind the Stars, More Stars, the Tegas Disquiet collection of new Luso-American writing, featuring work from the early years of the Disquiet International Literary Program, which she helped create in Lisbon, Portugal in 2011. Welcome, Oona.
Thank you so much, Kathe. I want to thank Forum 24 and the Gifford House for hosting us. So when Kathe contacted me about speaking on this panel, I told her that I was kind of in a dark place about the town, and I wasn't sure what I could say about the Bohemian past that would be helpful or positive. It felt like maybe it didn't even belong to me. I always thought of that as more my mother's than mine. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my mom was a painter, and she came to town around 1960, and my dad was descended from Portuguese whalers who came here around the time of the Civil War. He grew up in the Flagship restaurant, which my grandfather started. My parents went on to create marine specialties, which, yes, was intentionally weird because they were having a lot of fun with it and didn't want to run what my dad always called a normal store. And a shout out to my brother, I think he's in the back there, who runs it now. My mom loved Provincetown so deeply that when she was in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease 2 years ago, I noticed she was still putting together complete sentences about how the town needed to keep its soul, long past the point at which she had forgotten who I was. So the piece I'm going to read is a little dark and maybe a little uncomfortable, but I will say that the community I ended up working with in Lisbon after this takes place made me realize that I do have something hopeful to say, and that is that this Bohemia has proved to be a movable feast. And for a long time, I've also wanted to tell the artists and organizers and performers who keep things alive here that you have inspired more than you may know. I also wrote this piece thinking, well, I'll never read it in Provincetown, so I don't have to worry about that. Mary Heaton Vorse said that Provincetown was like an onion with all its layers. To me, it's been a lot more like a ham and cheese sandwich. This is called Tosta Mista, and it takes place on São Miguel Island in the Azores, where many of Provincetown's Portuguese originated. Tosta Mista means mixed toast. On my first trip to Portugal, I ate this sandwich nearly every day because it was one of the few things I knew how to pronounce. The mista distinguishes your order from cheese toast or ham toast. It says, mix it up. This big spender will have both ham and cheese today. I ordered my first tosta mista at a cafe by the Greystone waterfront in Ponta Delgada. Giant mid-Atlantic waves crashed over an industrial breakwater, never letting you forget that there was nothing else out there for 1,000 miles. The sandwich was slow to appear, and I began to regret it. Then it landed abruptly at my elbow, giving off a whiff of butter vapor beside my half-drunk coffee. The server was already gone. The fresh-baked pop secco roll had been pressed flat, toasted golden, and sliced on the diagonal. It wasn't dripping with cheese. This wasn't about the dominance of cheese like at home. The smoky ham slices matched the thickness of the biting raw milk island cheese. I sensed there were unseen standards at work, standards I didn't know. After that first order, Tostas Mistas became my compromise meal over years of travel, a way to avoid eating mystery pastries 2 or 3 times a day. And I found comfort in being able to parse out the ingredients of such a simple dish. You could make it yourself if this kitchen were suddenly abandoned by the cooks. I didn't know that day that my father's family, the Patricios, had originated within the city's one-time cod fishing neighborhood, whose remnants lay yards from where I was eating. Then all I had was the name of the island, which I'd found in old records in Town Hall. All I knew about it was that it had been cut off from its waterfront, its harbor filled in to build a misbegotten highway. To have a Tosta Mista near the old neighborhood was not to become a part of the place, but to at least stand beside its warmth for a moment. I don't know if you can be at home in a sandwich, but perhaps this was that. It's easier for me than attempting to be at home in a place. I am Mista myself. I'm half Portuguese and half Anglo. In the word Mista, I hear fragments of English, mist, mix, me. And it is what I always am in the eyes of New England, if New England could be said to have a gaze of its own. I think it does, though it's an old one, holding on in the backs of people's minds when they go to retrieve a reference for what you are. On my first day at a new school in 9th grade, I sat cross-legged on the floor of a converted mansion near Boston. Women in purple and blue suits and gold brooches asked each new girl to talk about where she was from and what that place meant to her. I told them that I was from a Portuguese community, that we had a strong work ethic, and I hoped this was a trait I could take away from there. The golden women nodded and sighed, and one gave me a lingering smile she didn't give the other girls. I immediately regretted saying it. Years later, when I gave a poet friend a ride from New York to Provincetown, we ended up at dinner with the owner of his guest house. I'd mentioned that I had local family, but he hadn't been listening. He assumed I was a New Yorker and launched into a spiel about his life and hospitality in town. I couldn't get a word in. Somewhere in the man's monologue, I realized he was saying that, as for the Portuguese community here, he and his friends didn't mix with them. He wrinkled his face in disgust and shook his head as if in warning. My body went cold. To my horror, he seemed to intend this as advice for me. I wanted to overturn the table and shout, "You're mixing with me right now!" But I spared my friend a scene. He was looking down at his meal and said nothing. I gulped back air in anger. The worst part was that I felt an old sense return, that the man was somehow right, that I should know what he meant without anyone spelling it out. And not only was I passing, but that I should continue to do so that no one would be upset. That night made me feel not at home, defined as an exception, neither one thing nor the other. That mix in the middle of a sandwich, two parts trying to converge and say that they are one. The test of a good tostamista is how it all comes together under the heat and pressure. There are mistas that come apart, and there are mistas that feel fully merged. It's in the joining of the cheese to the ham. All the interior parts have accepted each other. Before I went to Portugal, I had rejected a part of myself too. And here, at a Ponta Delgada cafe, made generic in memory, with a table made generic in memory, because it is every red plastic table awkwardly set on uneven calçadas, is where the merge happened. I can identify my own makeup. I know where the ingredients came from. The adventure of the afternoon spread out before me, fueled by the simplicity of that sandwich, the one I knew how to say, the one I had finally been able to appreciate, as humble and overlooked as it used to be in its over-cheesed versions at home. To appreciate the fineness and antiquity of this bread, ham, and cheese is to say that mixed toast is good in all its parts. There's butter on my hands and on the napkins, thin as vellum, pulled from a red and white plastic dispenser. I stand up and brush the spiky crumbs off my lap. I head uphill, shimmering with oil down to my soles. My way in this world, smoothed by the knowledge of one simple order and one now familiar meal. Maybe I'm heading up to the park where the poet Antero de Cantal spent his final moments. Maybe I'm wandering to the edge of town to see how far it extends in the fog. Maybe I'll walk the old neighborhood streets that once ran right down to the sea. Thank you.
There are seats in the front row if you guys want to come up there. Anyway, thank you so much, Oona. Our next poet is actually Jay Critchley is in the audience, and I was at a poetry reading, and after the poetry reading, Jay came up to me and said, "Your life is poetry," or "Your life is, you're a poet of your," I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it really moved me. And I do have to say, I had to coach my beloved Mackenzie this morning that saying, I'm not a poet. I'm not, I'm not sure if I'm prepared. And I'm like, your life is poetry. So I do have to say that. I'm going to read Mackenzie's bio. But the thing I wanted to say about Mackenzie, when I moved back to town 8 years ago, I was very I still am kind of reclusive and snobby, and was just in my Provincetown breakup, we will never be together again mode. And then Mackenzie moved in downstairs from me, and we fell in love. We just had this, we still do have this incredible platonic love affair. And I was able to see, actually, you're 35 too, right? Are you 35? Yeah, that's so weird. You guys are the same age. Anyway, I was like the first time that I was like, wow, people are still doing this in Provincetown. Like they're renting an apartment, they're making art, they're kind of working a million jobs. I was like, wow, okay. You know, I didn't think that was happening anymore. So anyway, and that was the beginning. So Mackenzie, where is Mackenzie? I'm like reading off my phone. No, I'm going to read what you told me. Must be at the top. Okay, yeah. Mackenzie is a 10-year wash ashore and 17-year career queer genderfuck drag artist, creator of 420 Honey and Magnifique P-Town's first local queer body positive burlesque show. Mackenzie.
Hi. How is everybody today? Yes, cool. Thank you all so much for having me, Kathe. Thank you. I'm amidst these legends, and I should have worn a diaper because this is so out of my element. Truly, thank you just for having me. Kind of the extent of poetry that I know, I was definitely more of a Dr. Seuss, Shel Silverstein kind of girl, and my poem will kind of represent that a little bit. And I also really had to look up what Bohemia was, because my reference that I had was that lyric from Rent that was from La Vie Boheme. I think we all know it. Gay, I love it. So yeah, this is... I was terrified. I've stripped naked in front of hundreds of people, yet this is the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I tried to talk myself out of it a million times. Even last night at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was like, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm so grateful that Kathe stayed on me and said, you couldn't find a more encouraging space. So thank you all so much for this. I love you all. I kind of, as I was learning a lot more about what Bohemia was, realized that my entire existence is a bit of a Frankenstein monster of the Bohemian places and the people that I've come across. And I'm so glad to be here as a 35-year-old Bohemian. So this poem I actually wrote the first winter that I moved below Kathe. I am 10 months sober from alcohol, which is amazing. I was definitely in the throes of my deepest, darkest alcoholism, but this is one of the very few poems I've ever written, and it still remains true today, and I can't wait to read it for you. It's called Refrigerator Winter. Get up, girl. Any time is fine. 5 a.m., 2 p.m., 8:45. Your path is familiar. It never gets old. This refrigerator winter in this icebox so cold. Open up when you're curious, famished, or blue. Maybe this time you'll find something delicious and new. The light's always on, glowing big, bright, and bold. This refrigerator winter in this icebox so cold. Don't let it get to you. Remember, you're fine. You've got you, your best friend, and nothing but time. So get up, girl. Reach for the gold. It's a refrigerator winter in this icebox so cold. Thank you.
No, I don't want to make Mackenzie do it after they were just, it's that easy.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't watching. Thank you, guys. I like how I'm like making this like weird dude corner, but is it really? Anyway, okay. So the next reader is a very, very dear friend of mine, one of my closest friends, and she has lived in Provincetown. I'm not sure exactly of her lineage, but she moved here definitely before me, and we became close. Michael Klein, who a lot of you probably remember or knew, he was at the work center and he lived here for a long time, and he taught a poetry workshop in my kitchen. And Sal and I really became close there. And so that was a long time ago. It was probably like maybe 92 or something when I made that book that I read from at the schoolhouse a couple of months ago. So anyway, Sal is somebody that, for me just is like just shows the soul. Actually Oona referred to it, and I had somebody in my car in the Dune tours who, as I'm talking about all the history, said, I can feel the soul of Provincetown. This was a tourist and we were out in the dunes is so moving to me. And that's the feeling I have with Sal and in our connection, you know, that we both kind of came from this soul of Provincetown. So Sal Randolph is an artist and writer who lives in New York and works between language and action. And she is the author of The Uses of Art. Thank you, Sal.
Hey, it's just really thrilling to be here. The year that I moved to Provincetown was 1984, and I lived here for about 13 years. And ever since then, I've just a back and forther, which really is not the same. But those years were super formative, of course, for me, and important to my soul. So I'm just going to read 3 really very new, I call them paragraph poems. They're kind of incantations also. You might think of them as prose poems, but they kind of triangulate obliquely on these questions. So this one's called Going from Night. Night does not fall, it rises. Or is it me sinking? As into water, I mean, as into another medium with its own laws. The way you breathe in the night is different from day breath. The water in your lungs is like drowning, but not. Stop fighting, they say. Let the oxygen come. Let the weight of the day lift away. Let the swimming begin. In this way, the night is tropical like a reef. There is no end to it. It is a gymnasium of seeing, color, form, movement. It is a child's memory. It is an infinite cartoon. It is a game that extends everywhere. The night excludes nothing. Into its waters, everything falls, and everything that is lost could someday be found. In the darkness of the club, we are all dancing. Every stranger is a lover, and every lover has forgotten their heartbreak. It's not that we loved it all the time. It's that we loved ourselves while we were trying. I remember the mirror and the music and the dark streets. There must have been some terrible sorrow we were all fleeing. Our hands in the air, the speckled light over everything, the strobe, the pulse in the bones. If I opened my mouth in the night, the sound would be carried away in the great roaring. There is a night in your past and a night in your future. Can we go on like this, going from night to night to night again? So this next one is kind of a riff on a very famous Rilke poem, which if you know it, you'll hear it, and if you don't, it doesn't matter. It's called Trans Rilke. Who, if I cried, cried out the door, onto the street, out of the confines of this skin, who, if I wept, would hear? What beauty would hear me? What beauty I have known would know me? What beauty would press me suddenly against their chest? And would it be breasty? Would I feel nipples? Would I feel pecs? Would I feel scars? Would those scars consume me? Would the scars of the transforming beauty know me or destroy? Would the scars be crying out like mouths? Would the scars remember their own beauty? Would the beauty scream me back into life? Would I endure the scream? And would the scream endure itself? Or would we explode outward into, I am stuttering here, mouth moving without sound, beyond language, standing in the street. I want to say naked, but standing barefoot, standing with my head thrown back to the always sky. And in dreaming, it is night, but only 1 or 2 stars make it through of that annihilating excess of stars. Everything unseeable, irradiating the ordinary city streets, the dog-strewn sidewalk. And in dreaming, I lie down there and remember some hillside, or more likely some stretch of water, while my ears fill with car sound and water sound, and I let that hysterical overabundance of longing, no, of beauty, make me sick with itself. But I've asked for this. Make me sick with you, make me sick of you. Otherwise, I am just one of the dead. And it has been like this for some time, and I made it like this. I am just one of the dead. I made it barren, I made it numb, I made it known, I made it well-made river, well-made wellness without the well, walking the streets looking for the river. I know it's there somewhere, muttering out loud, singing out loud in the streets, looking and finding just that sliver of edited water between pilings and parks, that slice of sky between buildings. All of this is known to you, but I refuse to turn my head at the sound of a name rhyming with mine. I refuse, yes, among the refuse, the disgust and discard, the infinite pollutants, the plastic, the garbage bags broken open again, the lovely and abundant garbage from whom I could live if I didn't always turn away. It's the garbage and dirt and dried urine that could help and comfort, that could ease, that is you, and you tell me now not to cry. Thanks. And this is kind of a spell. So it's a spell. It's called a spell for you. This is a spell to bring back what is forgotten. This is a spell to arrange the letters of language into a map. This is a spell to transmit my desires to the overheated air. This is a spell to turn on the electricity of ordinary kindness. This is a spell of praise. This is a spell of pleading. This is a spell to restore the fountain. This is a spell to shatter the defenses. This spell is a horn. This spell is a shout. This spell is breathing hard. This is a spell to bring back what was cast away. This is a spell for the earth, a spell of protection for the earth and its creatures. This is a spell for keeping true. This is a spell of warding and a spell of harboring. This is a spell to bring poetry to the poets and water to the gardens. This is a spell to shield the civilians. This is a spell to let the heart stay broken. This is a spell of petals, leaves, waves, clouds, granules, particles, molecules, atoms. This is a spell at sea. This is a spell for the nation. May it be wholesome. May it be whole. May it be wholly good. May each person carry out their tasks with a great tenderness. May each body be able to rest under a tree. May the cooks have everything they need. May the artists turn again to the colors they love. May the arguments become irrelevant. This is a spell of life. This is a spell of unknowing. This is a spell against petty meanness. This is a spell against greed. What were you thinking? I want to recall you to yourself. This is a spell to remove the stinger. This is a spell to hold you. This is a spell so that you may keep living. This is a spell for the tongue. This is a spell to hold you. This is a spell to hold you. This is a spell to hold true. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Sal. Wow, so powerful. So this last reader is also a very, very close friend. And although I always think that, think of them as a Provincetown friend, but we did meet, actually, that piece I read in the beginning, it was in a catalog, and Eileen Myles, who's about to read, was also in that catalog, and we were like sitting at a table afterwards, like, I don't even remember. It was, I remember it was sort of like a grumpy, complaining kind of conversation. And then all of a sudden I was at a writing conference and I saw them again. I'm like, oh, wow, they're like this writer. I didn't really get it. So that was like 95, 96. So it's a long time ago. And although Eileen and I have spent time together in places like Miami and San Francisco and New York, they are a Provincetown friend, and I feel like they have the soul of Provincetown inside them as well. So Eileen's illustrious bio. I do want to say also about Eileen, it's in their bio, but they were born in 1949. So I feel like that's like a very synchronous thing, like 4 and 49. Anyway, Eileen Myles is a poet, novelist, and art journalist whose practice of vernacular first-person writing has made them one of the most recognizable writers of their generation. Pathetic Literature, they're the editor, and Working Life are their newest books. They live in New York and in Marfa, Texas, where they are currently, though not at this moment, holed up completing their masterpiece and living with their dog, Honey. Eileen Myles.
Thanks, Kathe. I think I'm minorly taller. They just be kind of like that. Yeah, thank you. And I am here. It's weird. Okay, so I grew up in Massachusetts, and so the first time I came to Provincetown was 1969. I was in Falmouth for the summer in this very drunken house, but myself and another woman hitchhiked over here we had heard of Provincetown, and it was just mind-boggling. And then I returned here in the 70s, and I returned here in the 80s. But it wasn't until I met Kathe, and then she invited me to come here in like fall of '96 to teach a workshop in Truro. And it was like I came here, and suddenly I just had like a Provincetown awakening, because I was like, landscape, Massachusetts, art, queer, what the fuck? This is the place. I was like, there could be no place on the planet that was more my place. And so I think that winter I rented a place for 3 months on Commercial facing the water. And then I had already gotten involved with this woman who had actually applied she was a writer, and she had applied to the work center a few times and didn't get in. So she was like, fuck it, I'm buying a house. So she did the thing that I was unable to do, which was to buy a house in Provincetown. And this is like, the houses were really, like the house we bought was $220,000 for a 2-family. It was amazing. But I didn't have anything like that. So it was kind of like I was the Bohemian in the family. And so this is what my story is. This is a little piece of that novel that Kathe mentioned, and it's called All My Loves. It'll probably come out in a year, or it'll come out in about 3 years, I think. So this is called An Otter Inn. And if you didn't understand what I said, that's because it's really impossible to understand. Cape Cod and most beach places have this funny way of naming houses. I suspect it's an old thing, like naming horses or naming cars. And I have never had a car with a name. It's like naming your dick. The whole thing stinks of patriarchy, of family, the kind that's crazy about its own blood and anything you can make of it. These folks want a little castle, of course, the home. It's making a home be a bar. Our old tub, Sweet Peas Rest, Jigger of Fact, Day, Dog's Bone, Rapier, and Little Squirt. When we bought the house in Provincetown, we called it Our House, and that was the myth. Next was the joke that we would name our house, too. There was only one candidate, and look at my printer is so bad that it kind of erases a certain. I thought I nailed most of the words I couldn't read. There was only one candidate, and it wasn't a real one. Like, we never made a sign or shared the name in the same way that though you were drunk on the prospect of getting a house, we did. Marriage, we didn't. Having kids, you did years later. None or most of those things didn't happen to us because we were a big sex mistake. We had an amazing time fucking when we first met, day and night, and I honestly didn't intend to disrupt your life, and I was trying to keep mine relatively clean, uneventful, only changed by occasional bursts of love and sex, but never too deep. So I was charmed, delighted that you wanted to make a husband of me, that you felt that way at all, though actually you didn't. You just didn't know how to have sex any other way. No sex out of wedlock, you proclaimed. So the story had to drape itself over our volatile fucking, and then a house got involved somehow, and we lived in it for 4 years, and we laughingly agreed it needed a name. An otter in, I burst out one day, driving up Cape in our car to look at tiles. Or to go sit in a tub in a suburban mall and say, yes, this. And I was very good at these expeditions because it seemed so fucking strange. And at the level of tiles or bathtubs, I always knew what I liked, being more than a bit of a fag, but still never having been on these kinds of expeditions, having no money. Now I have a bit, but I still don't do it. It's not what I want. See, that's the Bohemian thing, what you want. So you could have just as well have named the house. If I pause or stumble, it means there's a black line, and I'm trying to figure out what the fuck that word is. You could have just as well named the house too, being strangely poetic yourself and witty, though those were deliberately unexercised parts of you. I remember you describing a poet I knew looking like all the poets in college, long, greasy hair and depressed looking. It was very funny because it was true. You had contempt for the almost hormonally down effect of the true artist. You don't go out, you take drugs, you pick up a guitar, you draw, you do almost anything but walk. You're so sad, and it's become an idea. But despite the cultural aversion you had for the type, you actually had a pretty decent case of the mind. You'd send me little homemade books when you loved me, and they were like concrete poetry. I gasped. I never thought you were dumb. I knew you were smart and a good writer, but a considerable dose of weird was also coursing through your quill. And you made good jokes during sex because all of you had a brain, and language was the due of the private performance, and friendship, which I had never bothered with until we were lovers, and by then it was so interspersed with passion that I forgot to call it that. But eventually I was kind of like your friend until you hated me. But this is not about that. Or maybe it is. An otter N could have burst from your lips too. Definitely when you were driving, because you were the sort who would drop a line off while doing something much more important, your agenda. It was clear. It was where we were going, and art and smartness was the décolletage that made the journey worth it, but not the point. And if art isn't pointless, what's the point? An otter N was fun because it was unattractive to say. It just gets lost somehow. An otter merges, so it sounds like you're saying something wrong. And it sounds like some kind of lower class accent, most likely Massachusetts. Slum of my mouth, home. So you can't know what it's saying, an otter. It's not classy. It's very nasal. Yet it sells itself at the end. In, clinch. It's a pretentious little flourish after nothing, a desperate grab. In, ching ching. Plus, what glamour do otters have? As it turns out, quite a lot. They have the best fur, they are the most playful, they have the sharpest teeth because they eat crabs. Crabs are their favorite thing. They can gang up on a crocodile in the Amazon and kill him. They started on the land and moved into the water like nobody else. Their name means water at its root. Otter, water. There are otters in lakes, rivers, and the sea. They grow accordingly, and their hair grows too. An otter N begins to sound like an other N. What could that mean? We know. There begins to be something secretive about it. Fox Mulder. Gillian Anderson, who I still want to fuck. Another N to what? So it's apparent, at least, that the owners of this home are a little interested in language, more so than wanting to make some corny stab at hominess and mine, like mine otter N. It's almost like a little poetry magazine, the failure and the zing on a sign over the door. An acknowledgement that two writers live here, because I can't read that one. Who would pick such an awesome name? Awkward, awesome, awe-inspiring, or ugly baby? To have made the sign, we would have needed to say us, now, here. This is our thing. It would have become the name of our marriage. People coming in would get the joke because they would be our kind of people. Otters float on their backs with a rock in their paw and break oysters on their bellies. Actually, they also have like a little pocket under their arm where they keep their rocks. The name makes me sad there's so much in it. Their bellies become like a kind of flotation table, like Tubby cartoons. I hear the loss. Do you remember Tubby and Little Lulu? They didn't acquire the distinction of pop. Tubby was an endless sight of fat jokes, but he was fat smart, and he was always eating in some unusual, lazy, funny way. Tubby was an otter for sure. The more you know about otters, the better sense it made for that relationship. It was really situated in sex and wit and location. Wasn't supposed to happen, but that's what got in. There's no reason why it shouldn't have blossomed by the sea, especially given such a good name. Otters have a prime position in fairy tales, particularly from the north. They are pretty much the fox of the north or the fox of the water. Both are the changelings who lure you in, you always being a man in the tale, by being a beautiful woman. And once they have you in their bed, they will kill you. I don't think women have the same fear that who they're bedding will become something else. If it's a man, he may kill you without becoming fox or otter. Men are always for us to become. Men are ready for us to become. And so they probably keep their guns by the bed or their fists ready for what they think is good reason. The wise or woman in the fairy tale will ask the person they are falling in love with a crucial question. What is your favorite food? If they say oyster or crab, you can pick up your cudgel and say, otter! Otter is oddly a perfectly good standalone name. Try it. Otter. You know who you are addressing somehow. It does not need a name. It is one. It does not lose particularity by being the name of a class as one. One otter can be called Otter, and he will stand in for his kind, blending the one with the many. This creature who was brought up to play and hunt and use sticks to break shells on his belly. Otter is like a pronoun. So rather than being an individual or a collective, it is pure address. Otter! And they will come and become what you will. Otters like to serve. Whap! Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Wow, everybody. I invited these people, but I'm blown away. So I'm very happy. So we are going to have time for some questions, but I wanted to just start with giving people, I mean, the presentations were just so on point for me, but I did want to put out the question, and you guys can also feel free to take this wherever you want, but I know, Mackenzie, both Mackenzie and Pat had referred to, oh, actually, I have this quote, sorry. I have this quote that I wanted to share. Both Mackenzie and Pat were like, I don't know if I know the word Bohemian, or I have to look it up. And I did think of Rent, by the way, because my kids listened to Rent like endlessly, probably like nonstop, round the clock for about a year or more. So I was very acquainted with that. And they would ask me, Mom, are you a Bohemian? And I'm like, I am. And I think they would be like, they would try and figure out all my friends. And I think you were around at that time, Eileen. So it was probably in that, like, who my friends were according to the cast of Rent. So they're like, is Mom like, yeah. Well, but that was their reference. Yeah. Yeah. You can't put that down, Eileen. They were kids. But anyway, when in, Rent. Yeah. But anyway, in, yesterday, Sal posted an invitation to this panel in her Substack, and I reposted it. And one of the comments was, I wish I could go to this. 20th century American Bohemia is unique, I think. And I was like, whoa, okay. So that made me feel really old. But then I also was like, so I want to put the question out because obvious, I think it's been obvious from the readings that it's Bohemia. The reason I use the word Bohemia had specifically, even before Forum 24, referring to Forum 49, was given to me, it was because of my work in the dunes, and just if you have never been on a dune tour, they do not control our narratives. I can talk about whatever I want, and I do all day long. So it's like mad rapping about Provincetown, about history, about Bohemia, about, being about the Wampanoags, about Lamback, the whole thing. So anyway, but that's where I got that word, was like kind of in reference to specifically to the dune shacks and the dune colony, which was up to 40 shacks. I mean, when you go out there now, you don't realize it, but there are photographs. They were a village, like they were right next to each other, so it was really different than the way the dune shacks are now. So the question is, just to start, is if you relate to that word, if you feel like you relate to it personally, and if not, is there any other terms that you think of yourselves? It could be your queer identity. It could be, just talking about this town. That's one way of looking at kind of being outside of things. But is it really? So anyway, just anyone that wants to share about that or has any feelings.
Well, I brought a quote with me, which maybe I'll offer into this space. This is from a book called The Bohemians of the Latin Quarter about Paris by Henry Merger. So he's writing in the 20s about the 1920s in Paris, and he tells a lot of stories about that. But in his introduction, he says, and, I may rewrite his genders. Today, as of old, every person who enters on an artistic career without any other means of livelihood than their art itself will be forced to walk in the paths of Bohemia. Maybe I'll just stop there. That's
okay. Great, thank you. You want to say something?
Sure. I have to say, well, obviously, it's like something that changes all the time, because I think when I first heard the word, it's sort of has so much to do with where you stand, because I think when I came to New York in the 70s, and it was like New York, it was a broken city, and that's what we loved, because it was like, I feel like for me, the way I think about what we're talking about is sort of like how we kind of camp out in the ruins of capitalism. And so there was a period until the 80s when New York was so cheap and so great because it was so broken and so fucked up. And that's what we loved, we could just do anything we wanted. And so I think that's why something like rent, we despised rent, because it was sort of the gentrification of our neighborhood, and it was suddenly commodified and then sold on Broadway, and everybody felt like the people who were writing it weren't us anyway, and so on. But the word was just corny in the 70s. It was like, in fact, there was a bar. It's so funny. It was a bar that doesn't exist now. That was the dirtiest, funkiest gay bar in the neighborhood, and it was on 2nd Avenue on 4th Street, and it was called The Bar. But its predecessor was a cafe, a really loser cafe called La Boheme, and it was like the kind of place that had it had like, do you remember those slices of wood? It would be like a cut of a tree, like the cut of the tree that would show, and it was a tabletop like that. But then they would make it really glossy, and then and it was a real 70s thing. And it was just like, if you saw that in anybody's house or apartment or a restaurant, you'd know wrong. And so La Boheme had those as tables, but the tables were crooked. And it was just the kind of place you would go when nothing else was open. We were like, let's go to La Boheme, and it was like a joke, and the food was shitty. And it lasted for about 10 minutes. And so the word was just bad, but also it was because I would say just because we were the center at that time. My understanding of the kind of poetry we wrote, the kind of art we made, the kind of way we lived in New York, there were so many of us, and there was a big media, like there was a Village Voice, there was a Soho Weekly News, there was a whole culture. So we weren't the fringe, we were the center. And slowly by the 80s, it started to shift, and suddenly we were increasingly the the fringe and the mainstream was the center, or that's the way the discourse was, and our media was dying and stuff. And then a word like Bohemia started to be about us, because we had always thought, what's that, So I think it's such a relative term, but it seems to me it is about, and even now it's so strange because I'm not as broke. I own a house. I'm not as broke as I was, but I think it is still about what I want and who I support and how I live. Like, I'm against Airbnb passionately, and I own a house in Marfa, Texas, and what I really love is to let people live there, because when I was poor, people would just let me live places. It was incredible how I lived off the fat of the land. And so what fat I have, I feel like I let young people live off, particularly if they're artists or just people I love. And I just feel like that's kind of extending Bohemia into the present. So I think it's still kind of something that's constructed and made out of wishes for the world to be a certain way. And I think it is based on what we construct and what we make for each other. Like, I think it's very Bohemian for us to get a check at this event. We walked in and we got an envelope and there was a check. Huh?
I said it's so supportive.
It's supported, and that's not, places where I get much more money, they would never give you a check. They would make you wait for months and you got to fill out forms and do this whole, like, it's Bohemian, just give you the fucking money. And I feel so good about it. I'm going to put it, evilly, as the last thing I'll say, evilly I use Bank of America because it's convenient, but I can, deposit my check immediately. And I will do it tonight because I'm so trained like a poor dog. The second I get my hands on money, I'm like, put it in the account, cash the check, and stuff. And so, but it's good heart to pay the artists right away, and it's
everybody the same.
Yeah.
I love that, including me.
And act as if you don't know what you don't know what anybody's income level is, but it's act as if they need the money, so nice.
I actually want to speak on that. I just want to thank Lise King, who is filming, and I just, a total pro, and we're so lucky to have her documenting this. And so, giving her some money because of what she's worth to me. And so this morning I texted, and here I worked the Dune tours all week, and it's carnival and it's been bonkers. And I'm like, do you want just like my sweaty cash or do you want a check? And Lisa's like, I want the cash. And it was such a Provincetown exchange. We talked about it. I'm just like, I came here and I'm like, here is the money right from one fist to another. And so I do love that. And I thank you so much and I appreciate you so much. Just wanted to say about that of like, I never thought about being Bohemian or other, till I was older. Yeah. And then it became something to defend. And I don't really want to, I want other people to talk, but yeah, that's really true. But I want to say when I was a little girl, they had the Scholastic book thing that you would pick your books out for school. And I grew up in the 60s. There was a book, I have to find this. I keep thinking of it. I haven't looked, but it was called How to Be a Nonconformist. And it was in the Scholastic book paper. And it was just like little cartoons and people like with protest signs. But it was really like basically, and as a kid, it was very supportive. It's like, finding out you're queer and there's other queer people. It was like, wow, there's like a book that I get in my classroom and it's like I really relate to it. So anyway, just keep the conversation going. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Hi. I mentioned earlier when I first got up that I was kind of like the Frankenstein monster of Bohemia. And this is definitely like before I really had a grasp on what Bohemia was. And when Kathe proposed to me to be a part of this, I started to kind of look at my history as who I am as a queer person. And then looking back at my parents, and I realized those fucking hippies were Bohemians as well. They went to Alaska to go be stoners, and they never told me that, but I did some research. And my uncle told me everything. He squawked. It was awesome. But they moved out to Alaska to be artists. And I think that they got really discouraged out there because, my mom was a flautist, my dad was a painter, and he will claim to this day that he was a failed painter. And he's my dad. He's an angry individual. But I'm so grateful that we had such a community out there. I look back and I realize that these, who we would call them the funny people, because they were very unique in the way that they dressed and presented themselves. And they were very much a part of this bohemian culture out there that really helped me kind of. I've always gravitated towards socially unconventional artist types. It's always just whether I'm dating you or being your friend or colleague. It's something that I've always just had a magnetized feeling for. And anywhere I've lived, whether it was Alaska or Seattle or Boston or New York or even Provincetown where I ended up, it's always just something that I've gravitated towards and I've found. But yeah, I'm definitely doing the broke artist thing, and I think I will for the rest of my life. But I love it. It's something that anytime I do make money, I'm never going to own a house. It's just not going to happen. But I mean, never say never, right? You never know. I probably have a rich aunt somewhere in like Belgium who will send me something. But yeah, I'm pleased that any sort of money I get, it goes right back into my artistry, and it goes back in. I kind of have learned that I'm very thankful to have a roof over my head. Previously, you. But the art that I'm able to create and the community that I've been able to build out here almost seems and feels like a currency as well. It's something that translates it. I mean, I may not be able to take you out on lavish dinners and whatnot, or take you shopping, but I can definitely sit down with you and talk with you and listen to your ideas and exchange with you amazing ideas. And it's I don't know. I'm just so grateful to be here and be a queer artist in Provincetown.
Yeah, I guess like I'm a bohemian because I have never had like a professional job. I've never had like a paid vacation. So I'm always like paying out when I leave here. And I think there is a piece that like when you're sexually different, like that changes your life. I mean, when I was like, I don't know, 15 years old, I thought I was going to have like 7 kids. And then it was like, oh, you're gay. Okay, things are going to change. Like, so that kind of made life sort of different, and the trajectory is not really so clear. And I think like art kind of sneaks in, like into that somehow. And you're with. This is where like the difference between like the what is an artist talk that I wrote about that we and like this talk is sort of like with that talk you can't really, it's hard to really pin down like is someone an artist a part of a certain life. With this I feel like you can say like, okay, Bohemia, like that's a life, like that's about a community. There's that sort of that's got its own sort of like ethics. And something that just came to mind was Ariana Reigns has like goes on those Instagram lives. Like sometimes you'll have your phone out and it'll be like Ariana's on Instagram live, bing, like you. And then one of the things she said in one of her lives, because she goes on and on and on, is like a radical hospitality. And I think in Bohemia there is that. Like there is like a certain sense of like maybe you haven't caught up with someone in a while, or someone's kind of floating through town, but you still have that kind of vibe with them, and you still are going to take care of people. But it's just outside of like the normal neighborly day to day. So there's that kind of. I think people think, oh, you're a bohemian, so there's no kind of structure to the way you think or live or treat other people. But there is. Like inside of that, you're still a person, and you're still figuring. Like even in for instance, like utopian community. It makes me think a bit like utopian communities. Do you think utopian communities didn't struggle? Like. No, they did. Like they're trying to create like new ways of living and being with each other, but there is still so much to figure out. So, no, just had my And I wrote last night. I just kept writing about Bohemia. I was asking people were coming into the inn while I was cleaning it. I was like, "What do you think of Bohemia?" And I'm like inside of a toilet bowl, and they're like, "Well, like going on and on." So I wrote it down, and we'll see what. Yeah, Yana was there. I mean, so come talk to me about Bohemia. What's really Bohemia?
Can I? I mean, I think what you're saying, I think it's another kind of time. And where do you get that time? And do you have to go to like fucking Brown, and get into a little, graduate program? Or do you have to pay $100,000 at some crazy graduate program to have 2 years to write? Or can you find a place and a way? And I think it's that. And I do think another thing too, I was just thinking about was like, there's a difference between a practice and a costume, And I feel like I did see, like in the 80s, at the moment where MTV happened, it was like suddenly my like little neighborhood where, like, first there were all the Puerto Rican girls who wore like little crucifix earrings, and then all the girls who were junkies started imitating that. But then Madonna, who is neither a junkie nor Puerto Rican, started imitating that. But then she went on MTV, and then suddenly it was like hot topic all over the malls in the United States. And it was like a representation. And I'm not even saying this is evil. I'm just saying that the representation of something that was really ripped away from its meaning. And then it used to be that you would look at how somebody was dressed and you would think, cool. And then it was suddenly this moment in the 80s and 90s when you thought, oh, it's just a costume. This is not like, this is not a Bohemian person or a cool person or one of us. This is somebody who wanted to wear that costume, but they're actually quite bureaucratic,
I'm going to just defend Hot Topic, okay? Because, there you are, like the last Hot Topic I was in, I think I was in Dallas, Texas. So I was in Dallas for some reason. And I was in a mall. And, I put weird color in my hair, and the Hot Topic was where you could get that. And I feel like, so what that means to me is that the kids, it's mostly teenagers shopping there, right? So teenagers living in Dallas, like, what do they have to represent their aspiration to not go, work in the corporate factory, right? It's even though it's like a simulacrum of a simulacrum of a simulacrum of a simulacrum, in that time and place, in that mall in Dallas, that is the place where some teenagers can express their secret hearts.
Thank you. I actually have a question for you, Oona, to bring you in. I'm just curious how you felt when you were young about if you thought about being a writer or an artist, and just within your family, like just how you felt that kind of Bohemian history, just as a child.
I was very lucky with my mother, who was, such a creative person, and all her life was about painting or trying to paint, and complaining to us when she couldn't. But I was speaking about the Portuguese American community that we developed in Lisbon, and the majority had not had that kind of support. They hadn't had the fortune to grow up in Provincetown and be in an artist colony. So I think I was it was rare to have that. And I was going to say that I was one of the ones who looked up Bohemia. I've never used it in relation to myself. And one of the definitions went on to say a person living an unconventional life, usually in a colony with others. And thinking about what Eileen said, the want that we had to meet each other was really powerful. So my little literary community, or my Bohemia, if you're fancy, it started right here in Provincetown in a conversation with Frank Gaspar, the bard of Portuguese Provincetown, who's a poet and novelist. And I didn't know him, but I wrote him a fan letter. And he was the first person of my background I ever met who wrote. And I only knew Catherine Vaz. She was the only other one I had ever heard of. And we sat there one day on the seawall at St. Mary's talking about this. And we said, where is everybody else? Where are the others? And while we could have, gathered a group like we did in Lisbon, in Provincetown, it could have happened here. We kind of have a geographical problem because the communities are spread out between East Coast, West Coast, Canada, Miami, and getting everybody into one location, one place. And to cut right to it, we got funding from a foundation in Lisbon to give 4 fellowships out to people of Portuguese, Brazilian, Cape Verdean, et cetera, backgrounds. So we fly 4 of them in for free, and the others get discounts. And we do that in the context of a large literary program that's open to everyone of every background. So it's about 100 people. So that's what I wanted to talk about. That's my little Bohemian now, and it's deeply inspired by Provincetown. Frank Gaspar was our first workshop teacher. It's now Catherine Vaz. And I owe it all to this place.
I'm going to open the floor up for questions, but I do want to just share one last thing about myself. I didn't really only shared a little bit of my work, but I currently, the thing I spend the most time on, and some of you guys are aware of it, and most of you probably not, but I am a meme poet, and I spend a lot of time not just making memes, because I only make a few of my own, but curating these meme poems in the form, and I like the classic form of 10, even though they let you post 20 now, which I find really difficult and chaotic. But anyway, that's just me. But in that world, I mean, I just loved memes, and it really was inspired by this like chance kind of poetry, which I love, and that kind of art making. And I just was like, one summer, I'm like, I just want to do what I love, and that's surfing and making memes. And like, I went from like 2,000 followers to like 15,000 followers that summer. And it was really the most cohesive art making process I probably had in my life. I posted every day. And the only reason I want to say that is that the Bohemian, like if I'm going to say like I have a consistent Bohemian community, the meme world, these people I love so much. Most of them I have no idea what they even look like. I love their politics. I love their energy. I love how much they give it away for free. I just like they post without, most of them without really giving away a lot of, I know some of them have regular jobs or toiling away, and they're posting this like free material that is not, if you don't really get that culture, you might think, oh God, it's social media. It is really radical, and it's informing so many people and inspiring so many people. So I just wanted to say that because I was thinking of it as people were talking. It's like in the last like 4 years, it's like that has really fed that part of my soul so much. So anyway, just to share. Anybody have any questions? Yes. I'm going to bring this back here. Hi.
Thank you. The long walk. I wanted to hear more about Hot Topic, friend or foe, because it feels very on point. How do you navigate the blurry lines between costume and practice when the parasocial techno-financial organism that we're becoming like doesn't want to let you go from making and takes your making and turns it into things? So anyway, I don't know.
Okay. Anybody want to answer that? Eileen?
Well, I just think since we're talking about art, it's representation is part of the story. There will always be copies. Like I feel like I met Maynard G. Krebs before I met Allen Ginsberg. If I don't know how many people that means. I mean, Archie Comics had Jughead, and he was like the weirdo. And then on TV there was a show called Dobie Gillis, and there was a beatnik called Maynard G. Krebs. And it was just like, I was like, what's that? And that's how I was introduced to the idea of a beatnik. And that became my Halloween costume that's how I could dress like a boy for Halloween every year. I would just put on a beret and a sweatshirt and write a poem and have it in my back. I mean, it was just like, I was a copy poet before I was a poet. So so it's like, even though I sneer a bit at, Rent and Hot Topics, I think that's just the nature of history, is that it just keeps copying and reproducing and stuff. And I think it's like how we fill those spaces rather than the fact that they're being reproduced.
Yeah, Totally. I just wanted to say, I was a punk rocker, I was when it was really punk, and it was like dangerous. It was dangerous to walk down the street with like colored hair and like, a safety pin in your nose and like wearing like, the zippers and all the things that like like, I don't know if people are still wearing it in some form, but, I just remember waiting for a bus in Boston on Mass Ave and like people like screaming out of the car. And this was like 1976, I think, 1977. So yeah, and that's like another form that has been completely co-opted and you see everywhere, and I just remember like I felt like I was literally taking my life in my hands to like present in that way.
Totally. Yeah, I think I feel torn because I do feel for what Eileen was saying about the imitation and the commodification, what you were suggesting too, of things that bubble up from cultures where those signs and symbols and ways of being are like really vital and really alive. But I didn't personally grow up with like Bohemian parents, right? I mean, I grew up mostly in Hawaii, where everything comes 10 or 15 years later than everywhere else, or it certainly did then. So how do you find your way towards, if art is part of it for you, or creativity, or living a life that's maybe not that 9-to-5 day job life, although many people also do this with 9-to-5 day jobs. But how do you find your way to a life that feels true to you? And you find your way through the signs and symbols that are littered around the landscape. And some of them are very inauthentic, of course. But like Jughead, like they give you a place to like look for something else.
Yeah, definitely. You want to answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen my share of hot topics before, but I was always more of a window shopper. It was definitely like, this is fantastic, and the more I learned about who I was as an artist, I definitely am not afraid of a good costume, trust. But there definitely was something that clicked in me as I started to discover who I was more of as an artist, and then that sort of inside started to match the outside. But I also only buy local. I barter with drag queens, or I just steal it from them and never give it back.
Great. And more questions? Yeah.
Hi. So, from what I'm gathering, Bohemians took major risks, and that's how they lived their lives. Are you all still taking those risks? Because I know from my perspective, as I age, I'm doing less risk taking, planning more for old age, which I'm almost in. So that's my question. Are you still taking the risks?
I'm going to answer that because my children are sitting in the audience, and I know they're like, she is not planning for her old age, for sure. She is counting on us, and they are much more conservative than myself. No, I'm not really counting on them. I plan on working for a good long time, but I'm not, and I still consider, and they will tell you, I really have tried. I have owned real estate, and I'm just saying it might be like a learning disability. It might not be being Bohemian, but I have tried to kind of like keep those kind of things together. And I say a learning disability because I really feel like some form of neurodivergence, even though that's just a recent word, goes into a lot of this for better or worse, and I just have to say, so in that way, I do feel really Bohemian. I feel like I will make it work. And the one thing I can say for myself is, and I'm not saying this to, pat myself on the back. It's like because of being a Bohemian and because of the way I speak and lead and mentor, I have 3 daughters. I have 3,000 daughters, and I know I will be taken care of because people really are inspired by the way I live my life. And I know that to be true, and I know that is a Bohemian thing, however it translates, So anyway, but anyone else that wants to speak about taking risks?
Yeah, I guess I was a tenured faculty member at the University of California, and I left I thought, fuck this. This is horrible. And I felt like that was one of the most punk things I ever did, you know? And I think it's so like how, as long as we continue to be artists, I feel like I'm making very little money right now because I want to write a book. And so like this year I sublet my place in New York and I'm just mostly staying still, you know, and not making money and just taking, I don't know that the book is going to support me. I just feel like it's what I need to do. So I feel like I'll be okay. I do think there's a thing about collecting rich friends early in your life, because I did see how certain poets, like I worked for a poet named James Schuyler at the Chelsea Hotel, and he was a charming gay man when he was young, and then he had a big old nervous breakdown, and he just, when I would come into work in the morning, he just was like, he would have been on the Bowery if not for his rich gay friends who kept him in the Chelsea, you know. And I thought, wow, you got to know some people with money, you know. It's sort of long. And so if you fall on the curb, you know, if you fall in the gutter, they will hear and perhaps they will pick you up, you know. So there is that too. A community keeps you safe, I think.
Definitely. Yeah.
Definitely still taking risks. The best thing in my life is to take a risk. Before I was ever in Provincetown, I was the first North American butler for Louis Vuitton on Fifth Avenue. Oh no, it was fucking terrible. These people were so out of touch with their $200,000 alligator bags that I would just have to sit there with my gorgeous suit. Don't get me wrong. It was fabulous. I had a driver named Wolf that took me to and from clients' places, but it was not for me. And it was like, clearly, this is just not what I'm feeling on the insides. So moving to Provincetown was a risk, and that gave me such permission to continue to take risks. I've done everything I've ever wanted by way of my imagination. I've put it down on pen and paper, and then all of a sudden it's turned into the most gorgeous productions I could ever imagine that I've been able to produce. I've gained so much more quality of life by taking risks, and I will never stop. Like today is a risk. Thank you all so much for having me take this risk.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I'll say something. Yeah. No, I'm not taking any more risks. No, I mean, I think like I think it's really important to figure out like what kind of risks we talk about. Like my 20s were spent, you know, really drunk and not making any money, and I decided after like trying to work at a law firm in the marketing department for like 5 months that I really just enjoyed like hanging out in the pantry and talking to people, like, which is what I did. And I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I don't know about all this. Like, I'm probably not gonna do the professional thing that I should do, but now I'm gonna go do this other thing and I don't know anything about it. And then, you know, it's like I fucked up a lot. And that had its consequences, and that's how kind of I came here. And as like someone who just really worked at a hotel, so I wasn't like an art person, like I was, but I was just kind of doing that thing, like trying to hold a job when I got here, and that was really, really hard. So like I'm now more concerned about like what risks I do take in terms of like not letting the things that were like about to really kill me kind of, you know, enter the game again, like, because those are now out. So that's sort of a great question, like what kind of risks does a Bohemian take, and what does it mean to kind of live while being a Bohemian, right? I mean, yeah.
I actually want to speak to that, to you specifically, Pat, because we've had several conversations this summer when you're like, oh, I'm still cleaning toilets and like, what am I doing? And I'm just like, and then I looked at your astrological chart because I'm like that. And I'm just like, you're having like this really powerful summer. Like you're like your talents and your like focus in this lifetime. Like I do believe, as an astrologer, I do believe that we have this like North Star, and it may not be concrete, but it's like just like how we're formed and what we're striving for. And I'm like, you're on it this summer. And you know, and then I like see you like the way you lead your events and the kind of attention you give to your articles. And it's like, I guess what I'm saying about that, so just reflecting that back to you, and I think the Bohemia thing is, unfortunately, in a capitalistic patriarchal society, we have to qualify Bohemianism about whether or not you make money, or whether or not you have a reputation, or how people see you. If that wasn't there, and we didn't make that standard, we're just being ourselves, or you yourselves, I'm not saying just us up here, and then it's like, and then we have to qualify it by these other standards. Yeah.
Just to say, I have been listening and wondering about, I mean, I think there is, there is a relationship between the Bohemian, or like the capacity for Bohemianism, and the support source, for that life, which everybody's been kind of talking about. And it does seem to me like there's a really different relationship to precarity now that younger people have to have, like in general. I'm making a huge generalization, but I do wonder, I mean, also like, so if you line that up with the whole like commodification of lifestyle, like instant commodification of something that pops up as being alterity, or showing, signaling difference, signaling whatever, and like whoosh, it's already on sale. And then, so the connection of that with like, what does it feel like to be facing future that looks so different from what our futures seemed to look like. Anyway, that's my non-comment.
It's like very, very powerful. Thank you, Rebecca.
I have to say something too, which is part of, and I don't know if we can answer this question, or maybe, how white is it? Right? I mean, I just feel like I've, at various points, I've suddenly had to look at my experience and think, wow, even though I was struggling and I was poor and I was working class, still white. Like I did in Maine. Well, I've written a story about being in Maine with a girlfriend, and everybody was alcoholic, and we were all violent, and my girlfriend's girlfriend was beating her up, and then a cop came over to stop it, and then I decided to stop the cop, and I jumped on the cop's back and tried to get him in a neck lock, and something I would do when I was 12, and I was 32, and I was quickly down on the ground with mace in my eyes and in handcuffs, and I was taken to a federal prison. I spent a night in Augusta, and but my girlfriend's girlfriend was middle class, and she knew lawyers, and I don't even think I even have a record, and it wasn't until I went and did a poetry workshop in Texas women's prison, and I was going to read this story at some benefit that night to look at, I get prison, I'm down with prison, and I was like, you fucking asshole. I would still be in prison now if I was a person of color or of a different class relation than the one, and that's huge, and maybe all I can think of is that there's responsibilities. When I wake up to that, I have to think differently about my privilege and how I share it, or what I do, or what I say, or where I go, and it's just a huge question, but it's a real question, because this is outside of the conversation and deeply in it.
Yeah. No, thank you, both of you, for, hold on one second, just for that reframe, because, obviously when I talked about the origins of this panel, I was talking about this town, this is also part of the history of this town and how white it is. And I'm going to keep the conversation going, but thank you so much, because I really was not going there, although I go there in so many other conversations, but I wasn't going there about P-Town today.
Yeah, I thank you, everyone, for being here. Picking up on the idea of risk, I guess the question I'd like to ask is, how are you helping other people take risks? Which kind of relates to the issue of class and race. And being in Provincetown, this is an incredible place, but it's a very expensive place to live. So how many people have an opportunity to even come to Provincetown to take a risk? So I guess the question is, how are you helping other people take risks as artists and as human beings?
I know for myself, I'm so blessed to be able to have the space and to provide a safe space for people, a space that I never had growing up, particularly between my brothers and my father. But I've allowed myself, especially in Provincetown, to create these sort of open spaces that allow for a lot of safety and a lot of trust for people to go outside of their normal comfort zones or take risks. A lot of feedback that I've gotten is that they've tried new things that they never would have, and I think that just makes my heart smile so deeply and beautifully. And that's, I don't know, I just want to encourage people to take safe risks, but especially in a creative sense, the biggest risks that they can.
I want to just speak to that with you, Mackenzie, because one of the things I talked to you about when I invited you on the panel was saying, I do think, we're kind of taking it back from race, but to another, like, I feel like you are very highly non-binary, highly like outside of, no matter how much we think this is a queer town, it's not a really queer town. It's a gay town, and it's a gay town with a lot of money. And I feel like, you really show this way of being in your body, in your gender. I mean, like I always say, my granddaughter asked me, what are Mackenzie's pronouns? This is a very queer kid, 8 years old, queer parents. And I said, he, she, they, and like Delphina's mind just like blown, and like she's trying to figure it out. And that is really you. And I feel like you really represent in this town. So, like I said, we're taking it back from race, but I'm just saying your presence, and you are relentless. You do not stop. I mean, Mackenzie is your name. It's just Mackenzie. That's the Instagram name. So I just really want to say that, like, it is very powerful. And that's the thing of, like, so we can talk about whiteness here. We can also talk about money, and we can also talk about queer identity and how it works in this town. And I do think, like, you have a very particular place. So I just wanted to appreciate you. Yes, I love you. Anybody want to answer? Yeah.
Thank you. When we were talking about risk, and the first thing I thought of was taking a risk on other people. So in, say, an arts organization or a fellowship contest, taking a risk on really emerging writers who maybe have zero publications, zero other awards, and seeing what happens when you give a small amount of support to someone like that versus giving a big award or having a huge event for someone who's already well known. And I would love to see more of that happening in Provincetown.
I mean, I guess one thing that keeps coming to my mind as we're talking is that Provincetown has shifted over the time since I've been here. And the most obvious way that it's shifted is the real estate has become more expensive. And groups of artists living precariously tend to happen in places where there's space and time, where things are not so expensive. And to maintain that quality of thought and feeling as the town becomes more, is just a less welcoming environment for it, not necessarily spiritually, but certainly economically. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think, that question is probably at the back of the mind of most people who showed up here today. Like, what are we losing? And what can we keep alive? And how do we do it? I think, mutual aid has come up, or, just helping each other in a kind of this idea of radical hospitality is maybe one way to move forward. But I don't have an answer to that. All the places that I can think of that were New York in the 70s was cheap, and Paris in the 20s had places that were cheap, and for a while it was Berlin that was cheap. And those places, a lot happens in them. And You need like vacant space. Yeah.
Okay, time for one last question, then we'll have some closing remarks. Oh, yeah, I'll be. There you go.
Thank you all for this today. It's been really beautiful and inspiring. I live in Montreal, which is a city that has kind of in the last in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, I think has been leaving that space of affordability, and it used to be the city in Canada everyone would come to make their art, and anyway, it's undergoing its own changes. But my question is picking up on that thread of how things are sort of instantly commodified now instead of the sort of slower process of the hot topics of the past. As artists, how do you not see your art as always already a commodity and always already a brand, or even like yourself as always already a brand? It's something I struggle with in creating. So I'm curious what your relationship to that is.
Great, thank you. Anybody want to speak to that?
I guess I trust my own instincts to do things wrong. So that no matter how inside I think I am, I keep being really outside, you know, and that's been very reliable in my life and career. So I trust that I'm fucking up still.
I was, when I sent these guys their notes, I was talking about this book that came out a long time ago, so I'm sure that they probably have kind of changed some of the thinking, but Jack Halberstam wrote this book in the late 90s called The Queer Art of Failure, which I love, and it's like the main thing was like, why do we want to get married and do all these things? Like, you know, like we have a good thing going, but, you know, it's scary and it's risky. And, you know, those politics have changed somewhat, but this was just one quote that I sent to the writers: failing, losing, forgetting, unmaking, undoing, unbecoming, not knowing may in fact offer more creative ways of being in the world. And that's really like kind of my MO too, you know, so I do love that quote. Did you want to say something?
I've never been successful at commodifying any of my work. I mean, not even slightly. And in fact, like for about 15 years, what I did was give away things. And for 10 years of that, what I did as my art practice was give away money. So I don't know. I think, but, you know, like everybody else, I have a longing to be heard and to be seen. And in our world, you know, that also means, in a way, a longing to be commodified. Like, even though I also resist that. So it's just a painful edge, like the Lost Edge of Bohemia. Like, it's an edge that we inhabit. It doesn't get less sharp, I think, as you go forward. I like that failure is a way to inhabit that space. Do you have any thoughts?
I was just thinking about how when we were in Lisbon, Frank Gaspar wanted to start a movement where we could get visibility, mainly in the marketplace, for Portuguese American writers. And it's like, that sounds great. You know, everybody got into it, and then we realized, you know, well, actually, who among us is invisible? And we have all these internal problems that we need to start with, and we just started a huge fight amongst ourselves about who belonged. And I feel like we got a lot done that way. I'm glad it went that direction, but no one made any money.
I just wanted to say, oh, okay, here. No, you can do it. I can end.
I just want to say about in terms of like race in town, and like I think it's really important to understand that a lot of the workforce is Jamaican. My coworker I have Jamaican coworkers. If you look at the workers in town, like it is actually like mixed race, but the visitors who come here in the asset class is not. And if you look at the year-round population, that's actually different than the asset class, because the asset class, such as like the 3 houses I live across from, which are owned by the same person, they leave for most of the year. And one of the things that I do love about the reading series that we started, you know, I started, but really like the community of people who work here are up to other things, like the poet Richard Carey, who now he works at a hotel. Like, I mean, now people know his work because he comes and reads every time. And so it's important to kind of, I think we talk about the Lost Edge, like that is somewhat of like the Lost Edge, because it's bringing out people who are here but don't necessarily have that kind of profile to or they're working other jobs and they're making art. So I think, yeah, and I also just like in my head right now, I'm just can't stop thinking in the last 2 years, like the property values have almost doubled. So there is a huge just difference between people who own property here and people who work the town. And slowly that is what's being lost, is the ability for people who work here to become property owners and be a part of the community.
Or even renters.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? I mean, I feel like if I could make anything up all over the world, it would be a nonprofit called Empty Houses. You know, and because we have dating apps, why can't we have apps where we really, I mean, I live in Marfa, Texas, and there's so much empty real estate, and there's so many people who have no place to rent. And it was like, how can that not get matched up? You know, is it that all those wealthy people absolutely don't want living people inside their houses? Rebecca has an answer.
Well, I just wanted to say in response to the question about sort of like self-brandingness of being an artist at this time, and I really, like, I'm just going to make this statement that I've made like in the past, which sounds really absurdist, but I mean it sincerely. I actually believe that like a Bohemian gesture at this moment would be that artists actually just become politicians and enter local politics and push back on gentrification, because essentially it's just like there's just a closed loop between like artists trying to do their thing and real estate people trying to sell places to wealthy people. Like it's just a direct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do want to speak to that. Thank you so much, Rebecca, because I know you were in politics in Hudson, which was another place I lived with exactly the same problem, if not more. But I just want to say that I have noticed, I keep referring to my daughters, but the people in their generation who have decided they could have gone and lived anywhere, and they have decided to come back here, a place that they really can't afford to live, because they want their children to live the life that they had, the freedom, the agency, and or they don't even have kids. They just are like, I grew up here, I want to be here, and that they are at town meeting and they are organizing. And, most of you know this, but if you're in Provincetown, Truro, or Wellfleet, you got to vote in person and you got to see how your neighbors are voting. I was at Truro town meeting this year, and like the housing stuff was so intense and so many people talking, and everybody, 600 people listening and talking. So, it's a little bit off topic, but just saying, yeah, like it's happening as sort of like this younger edge, because the precarity is the issue. They don't have the freedom to live on that edge, so they're looking for it. Okay, this is the absolute last, and then we're going to have closing remarks. Thanks, Jim.
I don't know that people realize it, but there is a big change coming into to the Lower Cape. And that is that in the next 3 or 4 years, there's going to be 300 to 400 new units and beds coming into this area. Think about that. That's 10% of Provincetown. So who are those people going to be? Are they going to be artists? Are they going to be people that have left the Provincetown diaspora coming back? Are they going to be elderly people as the town ages? So we have this exciting opportunity coming up where there will be more housing coming. So what are we going to do?
So And now I live in Truro after living in Provincetown for 30 plus years, but just saying Truro, Provincetown too. Yeah, this is just like get involved. It's another whole conversation, but there is a lot happening on these topics. I think I'm going to have, I think I will just have closing remarks. Thank you guys so much. This was so powerful. It was beyond any of my expectations. I didn't know what was going to happen. I really appreciate you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to say a couple last things, but do anybody else have anything that they didn't get a chance to say, or you guys feel pretty complete? Okay. Eileen, you don't have anything else to say?
No,
I find that I find that unusual. No, I'm only kidding. Well, one thing I was just going to say, which is a whole nother, like, more personal thing, but I think it's something that people can relate to, is Bohemian or outsider within your own community, and we just talked to that a little bit about like how queer and, or gay or whatever. And I just have to say for, even like this idea that I started with the Mary Heaton Vorse and my own writing about friendship. And I feel like, these last bunch of years with everything from cancel culture to current politics, whatever, there is so much bitterness and otherness happening. And that's like within the kind of fringe community. So I don't have an answer to that, but I just want to kind of like end on that of like to look, with all of this that we're talking about and all of this emotion and history, to really look each other in the eye and like see each other wherever we stand on this. I think everything has gotten very, very specific and, very like, fractionalized. And so just saying that we really need to see each other. And, I hope this is, it's open, just this, I started the conversation, but this conversation here has really opened my eyes. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Sid. Thank you. And Grace, there's Grace from Forum 24. For really, it's her, yeah. The love. Yes, the love. Yeah. I so appreciate this, and also my love to Dakota, for connecting us, and maybe that zine will happen now, Pat. Yeah, I think we're on that. So see everybody, and there's more events coming, and there's Forum 24 swag, and see everybody soon. Bye.